Hey, it is a Tiki Technical Tuesday, and it is a Sculpting Tiki Technical Tuesday. We are about to kick off the sculpture on a brand new mug that is a new species of a classic VanTiki mug. I'm going to reach for it right now. The Jungle Bird. Why am I returning to the Jungle Bird? Well, a couple of reasons. One, it was very popular. We did several colorways and they all sold out and people keep asking for more. Second, I've learned a lot about sculpting and more importantly, mold making. This Jungle Bird mold was very leaky and I had a lot of issues in the casting. So I think that not only can I create a whole new species that will live happily next to the original Jungle Bird, I think I can do the mold better this time too. We start out on the computer. I sketched out on my iPad a new design. It is going to be a rhinoceros hornbill, and I scaled it up to match the original species so that the mugs would play well together. From there, it was time to print it out in 1:1 scale and grab my materials for an armature. What is an armature? Well, it is the thing that holds up the clay while you're sculpting your sculpture. Clay itself is rather soft and it'll kind of melt and move around and mush around, so you need an internal skeleton, if you will. I'm going to be using some plywood. I spray fixed the paper template onto this plywood and I cut it out with a jigsaw. Okay, we got the bulk of the armature cut out. I am excited about this. The size is looking nice. I want to stick it onto this board, but before I do, I'm going to put a 1-inch grid. I'm going to put a 1-inch grid onto this board to use as a reference while I'm sculpting. It'll help me with scaling and proportion. And I'm also going to figure out, I want to make sure I place this exactly so that the grid will line up with this for the negative armature that I'm going to be making after I put this together. This grid is a huge help because it matches up perfectly with my scale drawing, my scale planes that I'm working off of, and it really helps me make both sides symmetrical. I put the reference marks on with pencil, and then I'm sealing it with crystal clear and sanding it in between coats. Why am I doing this? Well, I'm putting the sanding and the finishing in to make it nice to hold because I'm going to be handling this thing the whole time I'm sculpting it. I'm using pencil because when I sculpt it, I used to use like a Sharpie to put all my reference marks on, but I found out that when I was using alcohol while sculpting, it would lift all the ink that I was using for the Sharpie. So the pencil lasts for a long time, and putting the crystal clear on helps the graphite from smudging and stuff like that while I'm sculpting. Okay, so now that the armature is done, it's time to work on what I call the negative armature. And this is going to give me a negative space shape of the planned mug. It is a real big time saver for me when it comes to plotting out and blocking out the initial sculpture of the mug to make sure I get the scale just right. Okay. Ta-da! So now we have an armature and a negative space armature to help me put the clay onto the armature and know the exact dimensions that I'm hoping the mug will be when I'm done sculpting it. It's time to push around some clay, and today the clay of choice is Monster Clay Brown in the hard variety. You can get this clay in a soft, medium, and hard. I like to work with the hard, especially when I'm doing something with a lot of detail or that is going to need to have smooth shapes. To smooth out the initial sculpting process, I chop the monster clay into a bunch of little bite-sized bits and set them underneath a heat lamp. The monster clay is wax-based, so the heat lamp will heat it up quick. The smaller the pieces, the quicker they heat up, and it lets you really build up your sculptures fast. While the clay is warming up, let's grab some tools. Now we are just going to be blocking out and working on our main forms today. So all of these tools are pretty rough. I'm looking at like some microplanes, some really large loop tools, and a lot of really aggressive rake tools. Okay, the clay has warmed up and it's time for me to start the sculpture. Now I have gathered together some very good reference for Jungle Bird 2.0. First up, we have an actual Jungle Bird. This mug was the one that I did as the super limited versions, and this is kind of what's inspired me to try this whole sculpture again. I love the extra detail that I put into these super limiteds, and I regretted not putting this detail into the actual edition. So I felt, let's add it onto the new one. I also have reached deep into the archive and grabbed the original sculpture, which I'm really happy that I hung on to this. I hung on to it for a couple reasons. One, I had always planned on making another species of jungle bird in the future. And two, I just thought it was a good sculpture and I thought it might be a good reference. Anyways, I've got it here, which is great because it's really gonna help me set up the scaling so that the two mugs will match up nicely. Next up, I have got an actual jungle bird skull. Now this is not a real skull. I did not hurt any real birds. This is from a company called Bone Clones that sources skulls of rare animals in an ethical way and then makes copies of them so people can study them and research them and use them as reference without hurting any actual animals. So this is a real hornbill. Well, this is molded from a real hornbill skull. And I'm really excited about it. I used a lot of photos from their website when I sculpted the original, but actually being able to turn around the skull is going to be a huge help for me. And last but not least, I have got my scale plans for the new mug. And you can see the new top that I've got on this. I'm modeling this roughly on the kind of rhinoceros hornbill, but I want to add in a little more flair. And I'm really excited about being able to hold a lot more fluid up top in this version, or this species, if you will, of hornbill. Let's start pushing around some clay. Okay, here we go. First clay onto the armature. Always an exciting moment. The goal is to just really mash it on here uniformly and get it to just bond with all of the little gripper holes that I've put into this armature. Okay, as I start to mash this clay on, you are going to see the negative armature in all of its shining glory. The initial thing I got to do is just get an even coat of clay onto the armature itself. And once I do, I need to worry about how much farther out to build that clay. And the answer lies in the negative armature tool. So check it out. You can see that I'm using the edge of the negative armature tool as a guideline for how far out to build the clay from the internal structure of the armature. This is going to give me a perfect silhouette of my planned sculpture. And once I've got that silhouette, I can then work out in the other dimension. So I've got, the silhouette figured out, and now I've got to add clay onto the sides and work on kind of I've done my XY axis, and now I've got to do my other axis. I don't know. I'm no geometry major. I just push clay around. But anyway, you can see me building up the thickness now that I've got the general shape figured out. So I've talked about them before, but I am obsessed with using microplanes. They're fantastic. I guess this started as a woodworking tool, and then it became a culinary tool, and I think it's a fantastic ceramics tool. Well, at least a sculpting tool, especially when you're refining smooth planes like this. Hence the name microplane. It's the best. Now I'm basing this on a rhinoceros hornbill, but of course this is a fantastical species that only exists on a South Seas island of my imagination. So I'm still playing with it. I'm trying to decide how thick I want the apex of this horn to be, I actually want to make this a little more pronounced in the back, like wide, because I see this more as a drinking area. I felt that the original jungle bird got a little tiny at the opening, so I'd like to just give a little more room for people to fill it with booze or whatnot. You can use it for coffee if you so choose. So yeah, now that I got the profile figured out using the, this thing, I need to figure out how it's going to look from, the front and how wide I want this whole thing to be. Kind of making it up as I go along. Okay, let's talk about symmetry. It can be a nightmare. I use a lot of different things to help keep things symmetrical. One, this little mirror so I can see both sides of a sculpture at once. I use paper templates to help me line up things. This paper template keys into the little grid that I drew on the bottom of the sculpture. I will use tools like this round thing to push into both sides. And I'll mark the paper template with a pencil and then rub that graphite into the sculpture like so. To give me little marker lines. It is such a huge help to keep things all lined up and looking identical. I am always very jealous of digital artists who can just copy and paste or mirror from one side to another. It is time to stop for the day and give these eyeballs a rest. We got the form blocked out. I am super happy with it. And I think tomorrow we shall return and dial in the details and the forms and the surfaces even more. See you then. All right, it's day 2. We are about to get back into it. I am excited about diving deeper into detailing. I'm going to go full steam ahead today and just see how far I can get on this sculpture. Can I finish it? Maybe, but we're gonna try. First, we're gonna grab a whole new set of tools from the tool drawer. We're gonna move from these big clunky tools to a finer set of tools. We're gonna get some smaller loops. We're gonna get some rakes. We're gonna be working on smaller details, and that means smaller things. And I have a feeling after lunch, I will even be putting on my super crazy magnifying goggles. In addition to grabbing new tools, I like to clean up the workspace. This monster clay can be messy, especially when you're using the microplanes, so I'll gather up all these little shavings and put them right back into the bin. Today is all about details and refining shapes. We're starting with bigger shapes and then moving to smaller shapes and then moving to even smaller shapes. So the danger with pieces like this is I will put too much detail into one side and then have to catch up on the other side. You always want to just put a little bit of detail on one side, then hop on the other side and try to match it, or else one side will run away too far and you'll just, at least I will go nuts trying to match the other side. So I always got to be balanced. Always a little bit here, a little bit there, a little bit here, a little bit there. It's like a little clay dance. Okay, so the beak is good, and now it's time for me to really tighten up this skull. Now, skulls are organic, fiddly, weird things with lots of odd shapes, and I have to be really careful about undercuts. This is going to be a plaster mold that we're making of this thing, so I cannot have any undercuts anywhere. And yes, I am thinking about the mold right now. It's important to think ahead about the mold when you're making mugs. This will be 2 pieces here, a piece here, and then a piece on the bottom. So I'm going to rough out my dream shape for the skull and then dial it back and fill in any undercuts. So here's a close-up look at where we're at so far. You can see that I am erasing every undercut that I could find, and I am smoothing out things, moving from larger rake tools to smaller rake tools to even smaller rake tools. And as these tools get smaller, my eyes can't keep up, so I got to use these things. So when we moved back to Hawaii in the year 2000, it was a huge shift for me artistically. Up until then, I had been working in traditional media. In college, I did all traditional kind of media, a lot of just drawing, sculpture. And then in LA, in the film industry, it was all very traditional and all, hands-on practical makeup effects work, sculpting, mold making, and things like that. So when we moved to Hawaii, everything changed and I went digital, and I was a digital artist for most of the 2000s up until now. I worked exclusively doing animation and design work. And I got really used to some of the nice things about working digitally, mainly undo. And now whenever I'm working in clay and I mess something up, in my head, I instantly reach for the Control Z button. Even though I know it doesn't exist, I always still go for it or think like, oh, undo. And it pains me that there is no undo for clay. Of course, yes, I can just put the clay back on, but I do miss the undo keystroke with clay. Okay, it is coming up on 4 o'clock and my eyes and fingers and whole body are just tired. It's been a lot of intense focus with great results. I am extremely happy. I got so close to finishing it today, but it's just not gonna happen. There's still A lot of little details I've got to tighten up, and the details are always what takes the longest. But I'm super excited about the symmetry. The overall forms are looking fantastic. I cannot wait to get a mold on this and cast it. Now, unfortunately, the weekend is over and I have got a ton of stuff to do this week. If you've been following me on Instagram, you know I've had a lot of kiln issues and that has caused a bit of a backlog. So I'm going to be all hands on firing this week once we get the kiln fixed on Wednesday. So this will have to be finished probably in evenings this upcoming week, because I really want to get it molded by next weekend. That's the goal, at least. Anyway, we will get back to this as soon as I can. All right, it is Monday afternoon. I have got all of the work done for today, and that means it is time to finish this thing up. Just like yesterday, today is going to be all about refining forms, smoothing things out, and tightening detail. We are moving from larger tools to smaller tools to even smaller tools, with the hopes that these smaller tools will erase all the marks left by the larger tool used before it. Okay, I am very happy with the surfaces so far. I've gotten everything to the point where we are going to start to age the skull. The thing that I did on the super limited versions of the original Jungle Bird mugs is I added all this extra detail. The idea was this has been in a curiosity cabinet for maybe 150 years. From an old expedition into the jungle, they captured the first of these birds ever seen by the Western world, and it's just been handed down and preserved ever since. So whereas the original sculpt is very pristine, I want to go more for this. I want to go for weathered, old, and cracked, and that's what we're going to put onto this now. I'm not going to lie, it is always a little intimidating to scuff up or crack something you spent forever smoothing out, but once you get that first few lines scribed in, it kind of gets fun and it starts to look really cool. So I do really enjoy this ultra detailing part of sculpting, but I realize it is probably a little tedious to watch, and I'm kind of reviewing a lot of the footage I shot, and I think it might be a little boring. I just never know how much to show of me pushing clay around. I mean, it seems like we've been looking at it an awful lot, so I'm just gonna kind of use the magic of editing and jump to the finale. We did it! It is done, and it is beautiful. I cannot thank you enough for tagging along on the journey of turning that box of monster clay into a spectacular hornbill. Well, I guess it's a rhinoceros hornbill from VanTiki Island. It will play wonderfully with the original hornbill from VanTiki Island. They are both similar in size, and you can toast each other drinking from the skulls of ancient anatomical collections. I'm clearly beyond words. I'm exhausted. I'm glad it's finished, and I can't wait to get a mold on it. Speaking of molds, that'll be the next episode. My goal here is to follow the journey of this from clay to finished mug. So we're going to do this episode, which you have just watched, on sculpting. Next episode will be a mold making episode. The one following that will be casting and seaming and firing. And then the last episode will be all about the glazing of this mug. It's going to be an exciting adventure. Can't wait for you to join me.